Hi, I'm Andrew Sears, and in this lecture, I'm going to talk about how to use City Vision's free checklist and plan to operationalize values and avoid mission drift. Now, there's a lot of other lectures that build up to this, but we provide two tools. So there's a free checklist that's at bit.ly Ministry Values Checklist. And you can just click on that, click File, make a copy. And the idea behind this is there's a checklist across all four of these domains, and the goal is to get it to align with your theological vision. We also, so the idea is you first do the checklist. That gives you some things to think about. You've already written your theological vision. And then you work on the plan here. And I'll talk about these two documents. So in the checklist, it's a Google Sheet, and you're going to see a lot of, what could be considered best practices. But the point is that this thing is not intended to be something you follow legalistically. And the idea is some of these things will apply to your ministry and some of them won't. So if you look at the response, there's this your response, and it says currently implemented, want to implement, for future consideration, and does not fit or apply. You ultimately, you have your own mission, you have your own values, you have to determine, do these things fit or apply. Now, I also have this section here that's relevant material. I'm going to be adding a lot more to those as I finish building out all the lectures for this. And you can use this with staff or board to go through this, or other leadership. Now, what I'd like to do is to talk through a lot of the checklist items. Now, the idea is the checklist is intended to help you think through this plan. So in the plan, you're tying together all these different components. Both the checklist and the plan tie in with the four components that are supposed to tie in with your theological vision. And the idea, the whole point of this is to get your theological vision to drive these things. So here, in the first part, you developed your theological vision using this plan. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to get this plan to operationalize your mission, vision, and values. So culture, staff, and training strategy, programs, client and client culture, funding and business model, policies and board. And through this, throughout all of this, there's a lot of questions to get you to think about, this. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is to, after you've gone through the checklist, you're looking at the components of the checklist and then using those to fill in a lot of these questions about your ministry values. And the idea behind this is we want this to be a document you could actually use. So remove the questions and examples before submit. If you're a student, remove it before submitting. If you use this in your ministry, these are just things to get you to think about different questions. The point is you want this to be a real plan, something that you could actually, turn into something. So I'm not going to go through all of these questions here because I feel like that's not going to be a good use of time. The point is, on a lot of this, we have things framed on what you currently do and then plans for improvement. So this would align, back here with, something you want to implement or possibly for future consideration. If you say you want to implement, and then for future consideration, you would put that there. Let me just go through this because I feel like this is going to be really a summary of best practices. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to make it easier to see this. And I'm just going to kind of walk through what I believe are best practices. So for the first category of staffing, you first have hiring. So requiring all staff sign a statement of faith, requiring volunteers sign a statement of faith. You'll have to determine, do you use church involvement as a criteria for hiring? Do you have other assessment of spiritual commitment and or beliefs in hiring? So for example, you may want to hire people who are conservative theologically. Do you have job descriptions that tie in with religious mission? Now, it's worth stating that some of these, where it's relevant, tie in with the Alliance Defending Freedom best practices, and you can go and download that document from them there. And then you have onboarding training, and that's, for example, I mean, some ministries at the first 3 months, other ministries the first 6 months. So have you invested in documentation and training on the organization's history in connection with the history of the larger movement? So the idea is you want to tie in with tradition so that they understand, where a lot of this comes. Providing staff with extensive training. So the first one is, did you create the documentation? The second is, are you actually, having people do that? Another thing that I consider a best practice is requiring Christian staff complete basic theological training. So Third Mill has a really good Apostles' Creed to limit syncretism of just, a good portion of staff you hire say they're Christian, but then you ask them a question like, do all roads lead to God? And, probably a good quarter of them might say yes. So what's the issue with that? Can you train people so they understand what is the issue with that? And then, so have you documented and developed extensive training for program staff and your program values? We have a whole nother course that focuses on program values. And then staff training. Are you providing incentives for secularly educated staff to gain training in Christian integration in their fields, for example, in counseling? So it's great that they got a counseling degree, but getting a counseling degree and understanding Christian integration into that requires additional training. Do you provide incentives for theologically trained staff to gain training in related fields? So often, ministries will hire Bible school graduates, but they've never been trained in, say, addiction counseling, but they're counseling people in addiction. So the idea is we want, in the Wesleyan Quadrilateral to cross-train across both directions. Has a strategic partnership with values-aligned Christian university like City Vision, or it could be some other university, to provide values-aligned training for staff. And part of the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, being in a knowledge economy, you need 5 to 10 times more training and 5 to 10 times more education of staff. And this is the way most companies are operating these days. And it's hard to just do all that internally. So having a partner like City Vision allows you to greatly expand your total staff training hours. And we've had some partners where their total staff training hours, we've helped them increase by 4-fold. So more specifically, we have 2 courses that are particularly designed to help with this. So this course, Aligning Strategy with Theology and Values, that this lecture is done for, can be helpful for secularly trained staff. And we also have the program counterpart to that, Christian Approaches to Counseling and Life Transformation. Now, with culture and staff leadership, have you identified and are developing staff to serve as thought leaders in the organization's key domains? So resident historian, resident theologian, lead expert in Christian counseling integration. Are you managing your culture of your senior leadership staff to balance competence and values alignment? And have you increased training requirements, incentives, expectations for senior leadership staff to improve values alignment? So there's a lot of ways to do that. This is an HR thing, right? So conduct surveys of staff for both employee engagement and to ensure alignment of enacted values with espoused values. Have significant spiritual development activities and staff time allocated to them, like chapel and staff meetings, Christian book clubs, Bible study, staff prayer. Have a critical mass of leadership staff that would follow countercultural Christian values if popular culture turns hostile to your core beliefs in more significant ways. This might be the most important thing that is undervalued, because what most of the secularization cases that I've seen, reading hundreds of organization case histories and throughout history, almost every time this is really the key thing is they just don't have the right senior staff if the tide turns. And then have you written and provided training in something like human resources as ministry to provide vision for how HR is a ministry and linking your HR practices to your values? So then you have other things like staff evaluation and promotion. So staff evaluation process has criteria that relate to values alignment. So City Vision does that. We actually modeled based on World Vision. I think theirs is probably better than ours. But I think having that values alignment is a significant factor in promotion of staff. have strategies and or policies to consider collective values alignment of organization's leadership team. The Wesleyan Quadrilateral can be a part of that. Have strategies. I think that one's a duplicate. Um, all right. So all of that is in the staff category. So some of these things may apply, may not apply. Then you get policies and board. Um, so with board members and there's the board member selection and training is a big category. So do you have selection of board members that have the same religious requirements for hiring staff? I've seen some organizations that they only hire Christian staff, but they will bring on non-Christian board members. Well, unless you have some really careful policies around that, like maybe have one, position in that category, and that could create legal issues for you, honestly. You'd have to consult with someone. Then I think that can create a lot of problems. But more significantly, or maybe not more significantly, but also significantly, is to have board members with expertise in preserving spiritual values and tradition. So do you have someone who's on your board that they are really the guardian of, say you're theologically conservative? Are they the guardian of that value, and can they engage? Do you have pastors that are coming from churches that really care about that? You need to have some debate. And if you get a bunch of business people on the board, do you have someone else who can debate with the business people and say, hey, that pragmatic thing you want to do? That actually there's some theological issues with that. And, you have to think through that. Has strategies and or policies to consider the collective alignment of the organization. This should be board. And then have significant training of board members in values, have a critical mass of board members that would follow countercultural Christian values if popular culture turns more hostile to your core beliefs in significant ways. So then you have planning and best practices. Have you developed a plan that this course is designed to develop, a plan to operationalize values and avoid mission drift? And then have you worked with staff to further develop that? So, this would be you develop this yourself in a course, and then do you work with staff? Do you work with board? Have you implemented key legal practices of the Alliance defending freedom? You can pick whether that fits your ministry, and you can see the different items that relate to that. Have developed a founder's intent document or similar document that basically says these are the core values, and the intent of the founder is that this aspect of our values would never change. An example might be a statement of faith, or it might be that we're going to be conservative theologically. And have an ongoing discussion with board members about this checklist and a plan to operationalize value. So not only do you use this to develop this one time, but then you have an ongoing plan, and then use a tool like the Wesleyan Quadrilateral to assess organizational culture and risk. And I'll talk about how we've put this on as tabs on here. And then there's affiliation with values-aligned Christian groups. Is a member of the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. That one's mainly around, financial standards. And a lot of the members, honestly, there are, they may not care for the term evangelical because it's become politicized, but the standards they have are amazing. And there's, over 1,000 groups that are a part of that. Is a member of and has significant participation in associations of similar ministries, such as Citygate Network. Is a member of the Alliance defending Freedom Ministry Alliance. And then on mission and policies, do you have references to religious nature and mission statement? Do you have a statement of faith? Do you have, these are a lot of the ADF policies: facility use, statement on marriage and sexuality, statement on sanctity of human life. And you can work with them if you're a member of them. Do you have all these different statements? And then do you have a statement of faith that's aligned with religious hiring practice? Then systems and procedures have elements of strategic plan, budget, and or KPIs that relate to ensuring values alignment. And and then have identified other systems and procedures to operationalize values. So this is intended to be a catch-all. You can use or modify that. I mean, for a lot of organizations, you might put 10 new items in your checklist here, but I can't come up with that for everyone. So that is the summary of the policies and boards and systems to category. And then we get into programs. So the first area is defining and training and program values. So have you developed, just like we have this plan to operationalize values and avoid mission drift document, we have a program counterpart to that. That is how your program values have been documented and operationalized. And it goes into a lot more detail, and we do that in our ADC 506. We have a sample outline in that course, and then the program values document defines your program distinctives across theology, worldview, root causes of common client problems, and evidence-based practice or epistemology. And you can see parts 1 to 3 of the sample outline that we use in that. And then program values document articulates the role of Christian-specific interventions in programs like prayer, confession, forgiveness, spiritual disciplines, and then that's going to be parts 4 and 5 of this document. Your program values document identifies program distinctives of how life change happens and how your program works towards that. So for a lot of different groups that may be interested in seeing some example models for this, you may also be interested in looking at this book, More Than a Homeless Shelter, by Hope. It's for Hope Gospel Mission and Meeting Homelessness with Hope from Springs Rescue Mission. These are two examples of ministries that have worked to do this through books that they've published. It doesn't include all the elements that we include in our examples here, are in terms of our sample outline, and I can go ahead and all right. So, and then the majority of senior program staff have been cross-trained so that Christian staff with secular counseling and education take courses on Christian counseling integration, and staff with Bible and ministry training take counseling courses, so that you can have better integration, and have worked with the organization and leadership team to further develop this plan to operationalize values and avoid mission drift, and this program plan. And then you get into client culture and critical mass strategy with clients. So have you created a document for client that clearly articulates values, boundaries, and expectations? And here you have a good example from Hope Gospel Mission that you can use, and have defined and articulated clear boundaries and expectations for client participation in each program and program tier. Follow the requirements of client-informed consent according to the American Association of Christian Counselors Code of Ethics in contexts that involve counseling and or case management. Follow relevant examples or relevant elements of the American Association of Christian Counselors. So there's other code of ethics beyond just informed consent. Are you following all of those? That can be a good guideline to just make sure that where they're relevant, that you're following all of those. Clients have clients in intensive programs such as residential recovery sign agreements that tie into things like informed consent, code of conduct, client expectations, and all relevant organizational policies. So for some ministries, this isn't going to be, and the reason why I say intensive programs, if you have a emergency shelter, it doesn't make sense for everyone who comes to your emergency shelter to go through something that's going to be that detailed. But if you have a residential recovery program, it does. You have a written code of conduct that informs clients' code for participation in all programs. You might have different codes for different tiers, but you should, at least for the non-intensive programs, you should have some sort of code of conduct for people. So this would be, if you have intensive programs, they sign this. For others, they may not have to sign something, but whenever they come in, they're at least saying they're going to follow your code of conduct. So that is on programs, and you could add other elements to that. And then you have funding. So on the funding side, you have defined policies of what type of funding your ministry will accept and will not accept, and other non-values aligned funders, and have written have written and provided training in the idea of development as ministry and providing vision for how development, how your development link to your values. Now, there's a couple of really good books for that. Development 101, Spirituality of Fundraising, The Giver and the Gift. But the idea is, you could have your staff read these things, but then, you want to articulate, okay, who are you specifically? Do you have diversified funding with most of the funding coming from stable, values-aligned sources with limited risk of loss? Because one of the main reasons why organizations secularize is they have a big slice of their funding coming from something that's not stable or not values aligned, and they lose it, and then they compromise their values to avoid losing funding. Church and partnership strategy. Do you have an intentional strategy to try to partner deeply with values aligned churches? Do you have a tiered strategy for other partners to ensure the strongest values alignment and partners most closely tied to the organization and programs? And there we're really talking about a critical mass strategy, where, a lot of ministries, they will partner, it's just like friends. I have Christian and non-Christian friends. I have various, closeness levels, but the people who are closest to me, that I let in the closest and I share the most with, usually are the most values aligned with me. So, critical mass and funding and risk management have specific strategies or targets that limit percentage of budget coming from non-values aligned sources. So there are some ministries, especially critical mass ministries, that might take government funding in very specific, cases, or they might limit it to, 5% or 10% of budget. Now, this gets into some innovations that we've seen various ministries do. So some ministries, I think it might be Orange County Rescue Mission, has created a subsidiary with legal protections to accept government funding. There's also other groups that have created program segmentation with programs that will not accept government funding to avoid faith restrictions. There's a good number of ministries, I think it might be Market Street Mission, that have developed partnerships with subcontractors that accept government funding for things like Medicaid. So in this case, they have an office where an outside group can come and provide clinical counseling to their clients, and this group bills to Medicaid, and they have an agreement with that group to share case notes. So what that allows them to do is this outside group can do, pretty high-end clinical counseling that normally the ministry wouldn't be able to afford, to make sure it's tightly integrated with programs. But because it's an outside group that is accepting Medicaid, all the government involvement, doesn't get entangled. So those are all strategies. There's other strategies that are emerging. Now, let me just talk about a couple other things here that I think could be pretty relevant. So one is this, using the Wesleyan quadrilateral to create a plan. So the Wesleyan quadrilateral, so let me zoom in here, can be used where the idea behind this is, and this is just an example plan, but you could, if you're trying to build balance in your organization, you can take each of the four components of the Wesleyan quadrilateral and you can say, okay, what are we doing at each of these tiers? So what are we doing for hiring across scripture, tradition, experience, and reason? What are we doing for onboarding, staff activities, for education, for our leadership team? Do we have a champion for this, for City Vision courses, and things along those lines? So now this that I'm showing you here is just an example. I think this can be a helpful tool for you. And I would encourage you to think about that. And but you can use this blank plan to come up with your own plan, because it may not be all those things, but there's a lot of best practices with that. So the goal of all of this, and I know this is a long explanation, I spent most of the time on the checklist. A lot of the stuff that's written in this document here, the plan to operationalize your mission, vision, and values, what you're trying to do is to get all of these things to synchronize. The checklist is just going to give you ideas of what you want to implement. What you're really trying to do is think of this like a strategic plan. It ties in with all the aspects of your organization, but it is a value-centered strategic plan. It is a heart-centered strategic plan. So how do your values inform all components of that? So ideally, this is something that you could use throughout your organization. So the goal here is use this checklist to, develop ideas, and then look at all the questions in here to write kind of a comprehensive value-centered strategic plan. So hopefully all this is helpful, and I look forward to reading some of your plans, and hopefully we together can build a more vibrant culture.